Hello and welcome everyone to the world famous Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. My name is Andrew Medina and I am member number 1212. And today joining me is Riley Dyke.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us. We're so glad you could make it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad I could join you.
And just for the folks at home, you just completed your very first Iditarod,
Yes, I did.
which is huge. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is. I've also run the Yukon Quest though, which is also 1,000 miles. I ran that in 2018, and um, I like to mention it because it's like the kind of shrouded stepbrother of the 2,000 mile races. It's actually a harder race. Well, generally considered a little bit harder race, and is also 1,000 miles. It's just not as well known or publicized. But I will say I definitely think I enjoyed the Iditarod a lot more as a cold race. But yeah, I'm pretty proud of the accomplishment. We've run both 1,000 mile races now in the state, in existence in the last 3 years. Looking forward to the future.
So what was it like running your very first Iditarod, and how is it different from the Quest?
It was exciting. It's kind of an apples and oranges comparison. They're both dog sled races and they're both 1,000 miles, but they're just so vastly different. The Quest is kind of designed or was created to be more of a test of people's mental fortitude and woodsmanship skills. There's very little resupply along the route, and it's very remote, and it's typically very cold. It's -40 to -60 for basically the entire race when I ran the Quest. Whereas the Iditarod is not as cold, but it's the terrain's a little different. The Yukon Quest goes from Fairbanks, Alaska to Whitehorse in the Yukon of Canada, or vice versa, depending on the year. But either way, it's all through the interior and through the Yukon, which is the same ecologically the same the whole way. You're going to see the same trees, shrubs, wildlife the whole way. Whereas the Iditarod, you go from southwestern Alaska, kind of immediately start climbing into the Alaska Range, cross over the Alaska Range via Rainy Pass, and then descend down the Alaska Range through the Dalzell Gorge and then onto the Yukon. So you kind of get the interior there, which you'd see on the Quest. And then after a couple 100 miles on the Yukon, you move on to the Bering Sea coast, starting in Unalakleet, Alaska, and the last 300 miles are along the coastline and the sea ice, which is, all three of those ecosystems from the southwestern Alaska to the interior to the coast are vastly different. They're totally different terrain-wise and ecologically and temperature-wise. It's all in Alaska, but it's really three very different ecosystems. And temperature-wise, you're going to have a lot of variation. The interior is always very cold, whereas southwestern and northwestern or western, I guess, on the Bering Sea coast are much more temperate ocean climates. So your landscape changes a lot. And then the Iditarod is pretty incredible just because it's all airplane supported. There's 17 resupply points along the route, and there's not a single road to any of them. There's no roads really in the state west of the kind of the Seward Peninsula. So the entire race is completely hundreds, if not thousands, of miles from any road system. So logistically, it's really incredible. The Quest is very much like a hometown, more of your mom and pop shop type smaller race organization, whereas Iditarod, it's just just to even grasp the logistics of the race and the fact that they're organized enough to make it happen is really amazing. The Quest is incredible also, but there's 40 some airplanes in the Iditarod Air Force, which is a volunteer air Force, and that's how every single aspect of the race is supplied, and all travel and everything is done between villages for all of the supplies and volunteers and teams and the people who really make things happen. So it's really just pretty incredible to see what the logistics team and the Iditarod Air Force and all the coordination that goes into making the race happen, and the fact that it's never missed a year in its 48-year history since 1973. The fact that Alaskans and volunteers have been able to pull together to make this adventure race and this event happen is just really incredible.
How many people generally compete, and how many people competed this year?
57 competed this year, and this was the last couple of years have been a little lower in numbers. Historically, the Iditarod's usually more like 70 to 90 mushers competing, whereas last year I think was 52. This year was 57. So it's still a lot of people, but it's lower than it's been historically, just primarily due to the economics of sled dog racing. It's owning and running a kennel and competing in these races. I talked about all those logistics and all. It all costs a lot of money, so it's numbers have shrunk over the years, but it's still quite a few competitors.
Now, how many people started the race this year, and how many people finished the race this year?
57 started, and then I think 34 or 35 finished. You have to check the count again, but I think 34 finished.
So don't finish.
What's that? Yeah. This was the highest, and that's kind of an anomaly for the Iditarod. The Quest, you see that a lot. Like when I ran the Quest, 27 started, 13 finished, and a 50% scratch rate is high in the Quest, but a 40% scratch rate is not uncommon in the Quest because it's cold and it takes a lot to get 1,000 miles in those conditions sometimes. Whereas the Iditarod this year was 40%, around 40% scratch rate, and this is the highest scratch rate in its history. Even in 1973, the first year it ran, when everyone who started that race had no idea if it was even possible, to be done, to go 1,000 miles along the route they were taking, which the Iditarod Trail is all a historic gold route from the gold rush from Iditarod and then Ophir and Cripple in the early 1900s. That was the last major gold rush in America in 1914 or so, and then kind of ended with the start of World War I. But it's all a historic gold route, so they were following a known route, but it hadn't been used since the gold rush ended in World War I. So they had no idea when they started that race if it was even going to be possible to do it. And it's not like today where you have a snow machine that's putting in the trail ahead of them. They put in the entire trail, by dogs. So it says a lot about this race. Less people, there's a higher percentage of people that scratch than even in its inaugural year when it wasn't known if it was possible or not. It's a lot of changing conditions and deep snow this year. So it's the highest scratch rate in this race.
Now you had worked on with a team before you ran this year's race. What was that team, and what did you do for them?
What do you mean, team?
Well, so you ran this year's race, but had you worked with other teams in the past? Had you worked with other mushers in the past?
Or other mushers is what you're asking, or?
Yeah, had you worked with any other mushers before this year?
Yes, usually when we talk about team, we're talking about dog teams. Because
Gotcha.
You're talking about musher, refer to them as mushers. But yeah, so my team I raised completely from birth and started from scratch. My dog team, but I started out working with Matt Hall in 2013, and then Brian Olson, Sven Haltman, all sequentially from Matt. So yeah, I worked for several real competitive race mushers and their dogs, and was mentored by them. There's a large learning curve before you get into building your own team, and then I started building my own kennel in 2015. But yeah, I spent three or 4 years being mentored by other race mushers. Prior to that, I worked for 3 years in Colorado, running dogs since I was 18 in Colorado. I started in 2010. So yeah, worked with a lot of dogs and a lot of other mushers in the last 10 years.
Sure. And so,
but that mentorship is really cool. You're not going to have any. Generally, you can have success, but it's a lot longer path to success if you don't kind of start out learning from others.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now, do you have your own? Oh, who's that?
That's Neptune, and then we have next to Kimbo, and then Dana hanging out on the couch. But
you're so handsome.
And Brody, yeah, is on the dog bed up there.
So what is it like having your team there? So is that your team, first of all?
Yes. I've had my own kennel. I started my kennel in 2015. So.
And what is it called?
Dark Horse Racing Kennel.
All right. You heard of Dark Horse Racing Kennel? We'll include a link in the description of this video so you can check it out. And so see some of the teams, see some of the mushers, and yeah, support them. But yeah, so you started your kennel in 2015, and so what did it take to grow that kennel and get it to a place where it was race ready for this year?
Yeah, it's a long path to get a team, and we weren't really competitive this year. But next year we plan to be. The pandemic and delay the Iditarod, that is. But yeah, it's I don't know, a lot like a triathlete or any sport really. You don't just raise a puppy and then they're ready to race when they're 12 months old. They're really not ready to race until they're 3 or 4 at a competitive level. So all the dogs in my team in summer of 2015. So they're all 4 years old, turning 5 this summer of 2020. They ran the Quest in 2018 on a what we call a puppy schedule. They're all 2 years old. So, we consider puppies until they're really 3 years old. So they were on a juvenile schedule, which is just like a JV. They're a lot like a JV team when they're 1 and 2. Don't just raise a dog and then ask them to go 1,000 miles at a fast pace. It's just like you have to push them too hard when they're young. We'll just burn them out mentally. They'll be like, wow, this is a lot more work and a lot less fun than we anticipated. And mentally, you'll never get really what you can out of them because they're just not having fun. To be successful in these races, the dogs have to be happy and they have to be having fun. A dog team will not move quickly for 1,000 miles if they're not having fun. Trudge along, if anything. So you have to have that spunk, that happiness. It has to be fun for them, and the only way you can get there is by, taking the proper amount of time and years old. So if I breed a litter, if you have a little puppy, we're not looking at them contributing this, contributing 3 years. Really. So I'm still in the first generation of my kennel. You can put a team together that can run a 1,000-mile race in about 2 years. That's what we did last. That was in a juvenile schedule. We were taking more rest time run time in that race. Whereas, ultimately it'd be kind of the other way around. But, the goal when you're running young dogs is to have them all easy, just away. And then you just pull up there. They know what 1,000 miles is like, then the proof, and then go a little bit harder. Yeah, it's a slow building process to do it the right way.
So
They need a
So can you tell us a little bit about the training process? Like how early do they start? What is like a typical day for them? How do you develop them? Like what is a workout like for them? And like what does it take to sort of maintain these athletes? Because that's what they are.
it's a lot, again, like a human. If there's any marathon runners or triathletes out there, it's very, it's the same concepts. They're still athletes, just the same as a little bit higher level than humans in format, but it's still the same base concepts. We're going to start off, our training season for each winter, September, early September, cool up out to run comfortably. We don't go mid to late November, so we start off and we don't start out, an average day by December is going to be 30 to 40 miles. Average. But we don't start out a new program. Start off 3 miles. 3 miles. And after a few days of that, or cool enough, we're also very really below 40 degrees for fall. Then we bump up 5 miles and 7 miles. And maybe a week of 3-day runs, and then a week of 5-mile runs, a week of 7-mile runs, and then gradually we bump up by late November. But then, much like a human athlete, you're training for a marathon, you're never running 26, 22 miles. You're getting probably 6 miles, a really long run might be 8 miles. Doing 12, 10, 12 miles, or maybe 15 on runs. Same thing for these guys. Doing 1,000 miles in training, because we're not doing 1,000 miles on a race either. Really, we're breaking it up into 35 to maybe occasional, maybe a 7 mile, 8 mile, move. But once they have that base of 40 miles, and that keeps it fun, it keeps it happy. Training 80-mile runs, that'd be like 30 miles. It's full on your body and more than anything. So 30 miles or 40 miles for a sled dog, and elite level sled dog that's been properly trained up to that, that's like an elite 10 mile. It's easy. It's super easy. And it's super fun, but it keeps them at the level they need to be at. So we're doing 40 miles or so, and we'll do a lot of we do cycles. They'll run 4 hours, 35 miles approximately, rest 4 hours, 4 hours. What we call maintenance training. They're just doing one run. And then actual training series, they might be 240 miles over the course of just doing 40 mile, basically interval. That's really simulating a running, they're resting, and eating, that they're eating. It's a long building process. By the time we start the race, I'll have about 2,000 to 3,000 miles, 2,500 to 3,000 miles training. A lot of days, a lot of time, really on through.
So, how much do these dogs have to eat, or how much, how much do they have to consume in order to stay at that in that kind of shape? Hi, puppy.
They're eating and kind of baseline in the winter is about 10, and that in the heavy training months when it's pulled out is 10,000 calories a day. Which, average weight, they're not 70-pound Siberian Huskies, these pets anymore. The Phoebe knows 40 to 55-pound Alaskan Huskies, which most people probably wouldn't even identify as what they consider a breed. Alaskan Huskies are bred for their athletic ability, and they're not overly large and furry. They're small, and in my mind, a 50-pound dog is a pretty small dog, really, when you think about pulling sled. A 50-pound animal eating 10,000 calories. Somebody my size at 170, 180 pounds or so eating like 60,000 calories. It's almost unfathomable amount. To say these numbers and people think we're exaggerating. Truly, a baseline number for them to eat is 10,000 calories. Equivalent to me going to McDonald's and eating literally every single thing on the menu on one sitting. And then in a race setting, they're eating more like 14,000 calories, 14,000 calories a day. If not in the quest, it's at 60 below, and I'm more like 16,000. Crazy. But older, it's more fuel than me. So yeah, it's a lot of fuel. That's about depends on your diet. For me, it's about 60% high performance food that's made just blood dogs. Calorically, it's just better than meat, and then meat. Some dogs, when you're on a race, they're all going to eat it. Some might eat 100% raw. Commercial high performance fuel. That's what you want when they're tired and they're hungry. So yeah, their diets are there's a lot of science, a lot of stats and things like that go into it, and a lot of supplements we give with it. But it's pretty incredible what they do. Metabolically, the whole animal in the kingdom has a metabolism punches Alaskan Huskies. At least pretty crazy.
So, to put in perspective for folks, I heard somewhere that, going back to the calorie count thing, it's like they have to eat 10 Big Macs a day to, be just like sort of baseline shape.
Yep, exactly. That's just to maintain their body condition. They're not skinny, basically. And then a heavy day of training might be, and that's a basic day or maintenance day of training, or an off day is 10,000. And if they're running, it's say they do a couple runs or a bigger run, it's probably at least 12,000 calories.
Like 12 Big Macs.
12 per 50-pound animal.
It's incredible. So it might cost a ton to feed all these boys and girls. Like, how do you pay for it? How do other mushers pay for it? Like, what does that look like? Like, how do you sustain over the time you're not racing?
It sure does cost a ton. That's Phoebe worked with me. What Phoebe did you work on the glacier? 4 years total? 3 as an expediter?
3 years total.
Oh.
Maybe it was 4. 3 or 4.
2 years or 3 years? Well, anyway, Phoebe worked on the glacier crew for several years with us, and I've been there for the last 7 years. And that's 70% of my income is living on a glacier, and and that helps because it cuts 4 months out of my dog food bill approximately. Because while we're on the glacier, they're being fed by the company, and then I have no expenses during that time. So it's really no expenses for me or the dog for 4 to 5 months, and they're able to save all the money they make. But it's seasonal work and it's kind of weather dependent. And that's been my primary source of income, is just getting a little glacier and giving bobsled tours for the last 7 years. But I just switched to working for Trailbreaker Kennel here in Fairbanks, which is owned by David Monson, who is the husband of the late Susan Butcher, who was a 4-time Iditarod champion in the late 80s. Really a big name back in the early 90s, late 80s. You know, she was just inducted into, I think it was a Hall of like Great Accomplishment. She received some Great Accomplishment Award the same year that George Lucas did, and they're close family friends with George Lucas and Bill Gates, and it was just back in the late 80s, early 90s was kind of the heyday of Iditarod. They were celebrities, really. Iditarod mushers were, especially Susan being a dominant woman musher who was just destroying the Iditarod every year, and kind of the person to beat. So she was, well known in the lower 48 and celebrity and kind of important people communities. So I've been working I just took a job with David. Susan passed away of leukemia, unfortunately, in 2006, but David, her husband, still runs and operates their kennel on the Chena River in Fairbanks, and it's same as the glacier. It's tourism-based, basically. In the summer, we give sled dog demonstrations and presentations about. Theirs is more focused on the Iditarod and Susan's legacy and the history and the influence of the Iditarod in the state of Alaska. But we give those tours to people on the Riverboat Discovery, which is a tour on the Chena River on a historic paddle boat that's fueled by cruise ship tourism, as is the glacier and Skagway's cruise ship tourism. So, really, to answer your question, tourism, how I support, summer tourism, doing that. The dog's kind of off season and my kind of off season. In the winter, I also give dog rides, but it's kind of, job fee, the main job pay, training the dog. We're usually training 4 days and then 3 days for getting a dog. So obviously, with the current pandemic and everything, all of that tourism is on halt and shut down. Future. Fortunately, I can still work for David this summer. A large property, the manager. There's still, a whole kennel of dogs to manage. I have job security in that, but about the company itself and really work making money.
Now, real quick, how many dogs are in your kennel?
I have 26. And 26 sounds like a big number, but really it's not a very big number for a kennel. It's very small for a racing kennel, really, because you think about a football team, an NFL team has a 53-man roster, and there's 11 people on the field. Even if you had a different position for special teams and offense and defense, even if you change up and have 2 special teams team, you're still looking at 44 people. If you had 4 different groups of people, they have a 53-man roster, but realistically, you only need 11 people on the field, so we have 53 on the roster. Same thing with sled dogs or any athletes. We have 14 in the race. Hopefully, going back to 16 right there on, but 14 to 6 in the race team, and that leaves me 12 at home. And obviously, we're going to have those young dogs. So this year, I had 8 yearlings or 1-year-olds that competed in their first little hour, but aren't ready to run 1,000. So I have my main race pool, and then I have my yearlings, and then I have my retirees. So we have 5 or 8 retirees that are inside full time, and 8 puppies outside, and then you're always going to have the young up and comers, and then the guys who are on their way out and they're living holding their couch now, and then the main pool who are still racing. So, most kennels are probably 40 racing kennels, or 40 or so, or 40 to 60 dogs. I'm at 26. Really, I don't feel 30. So, yeah, I have 26. That's about the minimum field a 1,000-mile race team with. You'd be borrowing dogs from other kennels to have enough to get. I have 16 in my race pool, but through the season, we're going to have, they're going to have athletic injuries or risks, just like people, or little athletic injuries, and maybe somebody gets a little virus, or I had one of my best dogs couldn't run in Iditarod because he got a sinus infection a week before the race, and the only way to clear it out after doing it, just the dater, and the dating her would have made her fail her drug test on the race. All the dogs drug test. So so my Juice had to stay home. Sinus infections, all these little things that knock dogs out. So you need a little bit of depth if you want to actually get to the start line with 14 dogs.
So assuming everyone's healthy, how do you choose who's going to be on your team, and how do you choose a lead dog?
It's just like any team. How do you choose your starting 11 football players over the other 53? The thing, you watch them for all of training camp, all of OTAs, and then training camp, preseason, regular season, and who's going to be your best. Every little thing about them. From I have 3,000 miles, which would be hour wise, a lot of hours. 300, thousands of hours of sitting on a sled or a four-wheeler, or standing on a sled and sitting on a four-wheeler, watching these guys run throughout the season, hundreds of hours. Every little minute thing about them, their performance, their appetite, and their attitude. And so it's really all those things: appetite, attitude, performance. They could be the best running dog in the world, but if they have a very finicky or picky appetite, they're probably not going to eat enough to be able to run a 1,000-mile race without being returned home, because of their appetite. So you have to have high appetite, high attitude. You have to love to pull, and really for me, that's the biggest thing. That's really fun. All those things. But then the leaders just have to be, exceptionally driven and exceptionally focused. Dogs like Neptune here, or Neptune. They're putting on a good show. Sleeping. Neptune, they're both, phenomenal lead dogs. And this is their demeanor when they're inside on the couch. But Neptune is 40 pounds. But 40-pound female Neptune here is one of the best leaders I've ever had, and she's the mom to 60% of my kennel, because they just have she's exceptionally driven and exceptionally focused. It's not real instinctual for Neptune's super hyper affection alone. It's not instinctual for a dog to be chased. It's much more instinctual for a dog to chase other dogs. Their dogs are predators, right? They don't get chased instinctually. So it goes against the dog's inborn natural nature to be running in front of 12 other dogs, even 3 or 4 other dogs. Dogs who are leaders are just exceptionally driven, and they're exceptionally focused. Really contradictory to like Jack London's writings. If you read Call of the Wild or White Fang, his description of a lead dog is super, mean big alpha male, when in reality, 40-pound female is a lot of times the best leader you can find, because Neptune, and same with her 40-pound sons, and don't care about pack mentality. Just fun. They're not intimidated by having yeah, it's really just drive and focus, and those are the things we can't train. We can train dogs or animals. Good animal trainer, train an animal or dog to do just about anything, but not train them to have that inherent instinctual ability to run in front and lead a dog. That is purely instinctual for them. So if they have it, we can develop it and kind of mold it and build up their confidence and make them into confident, better leaders. But if they don't have it, if they're intimidated, if they don't have it, well, a team dog. Every dog has an important role, but the leaders are definitely the minority of the dogs out there. That's ultimately what's going to do and do anything. The lead position is the quarterback. They're the Pat Mahomes or the Drew Brees of the team. You can get by with a kind of moderate, mediocre leaders. Derek Carr can get a long ways, but you're not going to win an Iditarod with a second tier lead dog. You can have the best dog in the world, best dog team in the world, but if you don't have really that special leader and that special drive and that special, Pat Mahomes magic up front, you're not gonna be able to really compete at a high level. So yeah, they're the most important position for sure and the hardest to find.
What are some of the challenges, like during the race? What are some of the challenges that you have to overcome, and like some of the what are like some of the biggest, craziest stories you have like from the trail this year?
It's the thing with mushing. Ultimately, distance mushing is sleep deprivation is the challenge that we face on the trail as much as say we run 4 hours and that's 4 hours. The dogs will sleep 3.5 hours of that. We might sleep. I had it dialed in pretty good on the race. If I was efficient with my checkpoint routine, meaning when we stop, I put straw down for the dogs. I undo their tug lines that they pull off of. I take the booties off. So basically what I'm doing is I'm making a bed for them. I'm letting them loose from their lines that they pull us from. They're curling up and they're going to sleep, and I'm taking their booties off, which protect their feet from abrasion and things. But by the time then I'm feeding them a meal. So by the time they basically get their shoes off and get in bed and have a nice warm big meal, 10,000 calorie meal, and I get done with all of that, it takes me about a half an hour to do all that. So they'll sleep and they're out like a light. As soon as they eat, they know their routine. They're veteran dogs, so they eat and they go to sleep. We just had exercise, so they curl up and they nap. But while they're napping, I'm going through and I'm stretching them. I'm checking their wrist flexation and making sure they don't have any tightness or stiffness in their wrists, their shoulder flexation to see their biceps and their tricep range, and if they have any tightness or stiffness there in their triceps or pectoral. Most little bumps and bruises and athletic injuries are going to happen in here in the tricep region or upper shoulder, kind of their bicep. So, or their wrists. Their wrists are a lot like rolling an ankle for a human. Wrists are a minor injury. They're very manageable, but you have to manage them. You have to, make sure you're icing and heating and basically just using, rest, ice, compression, and elevation techniques on any bumps and bruises. And then we're checking their paws, looking in between the feet for any irritation or splits or rub or anything like that. And we're going to put actual ointment and foot cream and massage oil in between those pads, and we're going to massage and put compression on the wrists and massage any sore or tight shoulders or triceps. It's a lot of vet care to get the dog team, 1,000 miles. That's all basically all preemptive, uh, precautionary vet care. And by the time we get done with all of that, we might have, if I was efficient, I had about an hour and a half to sleep per 4-hour rest cycle. And then you're going to be a little restless in some of that. So, you're looking at 3 hours or so, 2 to 3 hours, maybe if you're really lucky, 4 hours of sleep a day for the entirety of the race. So if you're taking 6-hour rest, you might get a little bit more, but it's very little sleep for a long time. Sleep deprivation is the biggest challenge on the trail, and then the rest is just managing the team and managing their appetites and their attitudes, keeping everybody happy. That's all up to us, on how we, we're the ones in charge of the dogs, and it's fun, and the dogs love it, and it's essential, it makes them full. But if you ask too much of what they're capable of, or more than too much of them, it's not going to be fun anymore. And that's when you're going to see the teams. You might see a team that's leading the race for 300 miles, but that really doesn't mean anything, because if you're leading that early, you're almost going to be middle to back of the pack by the end of the race, because you're pushing them a little too hard too early, where people who do well are giving a lot of rest early and then kind of making a push towards it. It's never hard for them. It's team management. It's knowing what dogs, when you can take a 4-hour rest instead of a 6-hour rest. Things like that make the difference between a 12-day race, or in this year's case, 14-day race, and a 10-day race, or a 9.5-day race, the winning schedule. And some of those schedules aren't because they mismanage the team. People want to finish in 12 to 14 days because they're just getting a lot of rest because it's a young team, or they're learning and it's a novice group, what have you. But to be competitive, you got to match the rate. It's a lot of management for your dogs to get them. So that's an ongoing challenge, especially when you're sleep deprived. Doing math, thinking up strategy. Distance mushing is a chess game, where you rest, when you rest, how long you rest, and where you cut rest and don't rest. That's between 9 and 14-day race. In some cases, on a fast year, maybe an 8-day race, 14-day race, losers almost a week. Not losers. Last musher in Red Lantern. If you finish early, there isn't a loser in a 1,000-mile race. First or 500, you still summited Mount Everest, so it's the same thing. But anyway, it's a lot of strategy, a lot of math, and a lot of thinking, and all while sleep deprived. Severely sleep deprived is one of the hardest things to put the human body through. You don't want to eat, you don't want to drink fluids, you don't want to do much, on day 4 of 2 hours a day. It's really hard to take care of yourself, let alone 14 dogs. So it's an ongoing challenge.
Oh, sure. I mean, that sounds incredibly, incredibly difficult. Like you say, like a marathon on steroids. But how do you prepare? How do you prepare for the race? What are the sort of logistics and packing and getting everything together that you have to do before you even set off?
Preparation for the race is one of the biggest challenges for us. It's a tremendous amount of work. Most mushers are going to send out between 14 and 1,800 pounds of food and gear and supplies. Most of that being purely dog food. So that's all meat, mostly meat, cut and froze and bundled into sets of 14. So we're going to send everything from beef to beef fat, raw beef, lean beef, high fat beef, straight beef fat as beef suet. Come on, guys. chicken skins, poultry fat, poultry meal, salmon, lots and lots of salmon, especially this year. It's a warm race. When it's warm, dogs need leaner meats with high water content. So, salmon, beef, things like that. Whereas when it's cold, and by cold I mean colder than 20 below, they need beef fat and chicken fat and a large variety. So we don't know the temperature what the temperature is going to be 2 weeks prior to the race when all those drop bags are sent out to the checkpoints. I call one of my pet dogs in here. Dana! 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 Taking a bathroom break. Calling her inside. Dana, come on! And here she comes, full speed. Dana, come on.
Jeez. What a good girl.
Come on, Dana. Anyway, so we, to be prepared for that range of temperatures that we might encounter, we send out all of that stuff. We send out salmon, everything from salmon. If we're lucky, if you have a connection, you send out she fish, which is white fish, carp, or carp. Dogs love she fish. You send out everything from she fish to beef fat and chicken steak. And you're only going to use a small amount of that, and the rest, like I said, all airplane coordinated logistically. So it's very hard to get it there in the first place, let alone keep it frozen and get it home to you. So any dog food that you don't use is left there. And, every checkpoint, almost every checkpoint is native. You pick Eskimo or Athabascan or more northern Eskimo group. They use whatever food's left, in the village. Probably a year pet food, dog food, but it's good for them and it's good for the packing. We're planning on losing about half that stuff we send out, so it's kind of like throwing money out, but it's really necessary to have that diversity you need for the dogs. But that's cutting and bagging all of that meat and prepping it, and then all the human food and all the dog foodies and all that stuff. It's probably 80 plus hours, if not more. It's a crazy amount of work and prep with drop down. The week that they're doing a big week, we usually shut down every 3 or 4 excuse me, is a drop bag. So it's a lot. And then on top of that,
Sure, sounds like a ton of preparation and logistics is required to do this sort of thing. You sent us some pictures beforehand. Would you mind kind of talking us through some of them? So on screen right now, there's a beautiful picture of you and your team in a bright sunny day running along what looks like a track.
Yeah.
What's going on?
I see it on your. Let me just pull it up on my phone here, so I can really get and know what I'm looking at. That one. Yeah, so that one is that's somewhere between Yitna and Squintna, Yitna Station and Squintna. So very, very early in the race. That's the Alaska Range looming in the distance there ahead of us. So that's about 50, 60 miles. Oh, no, it's somewhere between 50 and 100 miles into the race is where that photo will be taken. And that's, the Alaska Range on the horizon in the distance there, which we're aiming towards and soon we'll be going over. And that's a hot day. That's running in the heat. It's pretty for a photo, but it's not ideal for a dog team. I think shortly after I took that picture, we stopped and rested for 4 hours. The dogs weren't running through the heat of the day. It's counterintuitive to what people think, but we try to run at night and rest in the day to avoid the heat. Their optimal running temp is 0 to -20. So 35 degrees in the sunshine is not optimal. So that takes, it's like a human runner again going for a run at 100 degrees versus going for a run at 70 degrees. A big difference performance-wise and recovery time. Try to avoid running too much in the sun.
Now we're looking at a picture with some. It's cloud cover. You're heading toward a mountain. Again, it's of your team. They're wearing like blue sweaters. Like what is the?
Oh, they've got jackets.
Yeah.
That is. That's on the coast. So that is, that's on the coast. Let me think where we had jackets on the coast. Crunch is in lead. So that must be headed towards where did I put jackets on? I just have to think for a second on where we.
How cold does it have to be for you to put jackets on?
Typically 20 below, but when you see those pictures on the coast with jackets, it's because of wind got through their coats quite a bit. So that photo is. Let me look at my photo album. Actually, I was just looking at the photos I sent to Phoebe, but if I look at my photos on my phone, it'll have the timeline or the date with it.
For sure, man.
And I can tell you exactly where that's at. There's a tripod. Oh, that's headed towards Gollivan Bay. So that's the almost final run of the race. That's right after we descended Little McKinley past Elam, and we're headed onto the sea ice of Gollivan Bay. So the last 300 miles are on the coast. And people, I think when we say coast, people envision being on like a beach running. In reality, we're either running on the ocean, on the sea ice. So we're under, like Gollivan Bay, we run directly across Gollivan Bay. Or we're running through hills. The coastline is very hilly. So you're either going through major hills or you're on sea ice on the ocean. And both of those are challenging. The sea ice is obviously flat because it's a frozen ocean, but you have no visual perspective of anything much of the time. You're on the coast, and usually it's windy, so you can't see, like that picture is nice because there's mountains ahead, and that's why I got the picture. It's actually pretty, but much of the time when you're on the sea ice, it's just imagine being in literally a white void, just a totally white void, totally flat white. You're on the ocean, so it's endless, and there's no horizon, nothing behind you. There's a ground blizzard or something. So it's tough for dogs mentally. They don't know what they're running towards or what they're running away from, and it's tough for the human mentally. And that's the dogs feed off of our attitude. So, it's the coast is very challenging late in the race, and there's nothing for the dogs to aim at. Usually, they don't see land up ahead to run towards. It is to avoid. And same for the musher. You feel the same way. So it's mentally trying for both the dogs and the musher. Speeds usually drop a little on the coast and go down 1 to 2 miles per hour because, everyone's moving a little slower because they don't know what they're running towards. And then if you get out of the sea ice, you're actually move faster usually in those hills because then they're on ground and they have trees and they have something to perspective around them. They have something to put everything into perspective and aim for. But it's not flat. So hilly running or kind of running in a white void. So the coast is a pretty wild place. And then much of the time there's 30 or 50 mile an hour headwind coming also. So that adds to it. There's very strong from the Bering Sea coast almost always. But yeah, that picture is right after we come off what we call Little McKinley, which is a pretty major hill on the far southern side of what's called Gollivan Bay. Gollivan is on directly north of where Little McKinley is, and there's a bay in there, and that's where there's a village there. But that's 18 miles from White Mountain. White Mountain is the last checkpoint of the Iditarod Trail. So only at that point 75 miles or 7 miles from home after you get to White Mountain. So that picture I'd be about 95 to 100 miles from home. And yeah, those jackets were on because we just crossed through a major wind and snowstorm, which is why we had to stay in Elam for 3 days or 2.5 days to wait for that storm to subside. When we left, it was still blowing pretty hard, and that's why those jackets are on, just to protect the dogs from any severe wind. And it was warm though; it was probably 30. Ambient air temperature was probably 30 degrees.
Very nice. What have we got next? It looks like your team is running toward like this little shack off in the distance, like this little.
Yeah, that's leaving Shaktoolik, the village of Shaktoolik. And that's you leave and you run across the sea ice for a very short amount of time, and then you kind of get into like this. You basically cross this little channel of the ocean on this little overland kind of beach or ridge, and that little bluff is there. And then after that bluff, it's 35 miles of wide open sea ice. And storms can be horrendous. That little shack up ahead is a shelter cabin that takes place on the trail for not just Iditarod, but for locals also, if they're traveling between villages. That's really what its purpose is. Locals, and the Iditarod uses it while we're on the trail, but locals traveling village to village on snow machine in the winter, which is the only way to, move, travel village to village. And a windstorm or an ocean storm comes in, they have that shelter cabin to aim for, and it's on really the only feature that the landscape has to offer, that little bluff there. So many mushers have spent a lot of time at the shelter cabin here, leaving Shaktoolik. The wind is usually blowing at least 30 miles an hour. Normal day for the people in Shaktoolik is 30 mile an hour headwinds. So your dogs are leaving into the wind, and if the storm gets any worse, you don't want to go out into 35 miles of white void before you get the coyote. You want to hunt down. The shelter cabin is sometimes a very critical part for a lot of mushers.
Sure. What have we got?
It was beautiful weather when I left. There was no wind and it was sunny. It's all is like never happened in Shaktoolik, so that's why I made sure I took a picture of it.
Now you did take all these yourself.
Yes.
Did you take all these yourself? What's your favorite picture of the ones that you've sent?
Let me see here. A lot of those ones are pretty sunset, the orange and blues. There's 2 of them, I believe, 3 of them with one
sure,
nice
I think that's
cloud.
the next one here.
Yeah, those are going towards from Old Woman to Old Woman Cabin is halfway between Caltag and Unalakleet. So Caltag's the last checkpoint on the Yukon River, and Unalakleet's first checkpoint on the Bering Sea coast. And that whole run is really awesome and beautiful. And from Old Woman, you're climbing a lot to Old Woman Cabin, which is a shelter cabin, BLM maintained shelter cabin. You're climbing a lot to Old Woman. Then from Old Woman Cabin on, it's that real pretty wide open kind of rolling downhill, smooth sailing, and it's just a really nice trail and very little climbing because you're descending down towards sea level. So, I hit it at a really nice time. It's pretty. And sun was setting. Yeah, that's headed right towards. That's why the horizon is so big in some of those pictures. You're headed towards the ocean, and that was one of my favorite runs of the race.
It's a beautiful run. Do you ever like have any encounters with animals like wolves or bears or anything like that?
So bears are sleeping. Bears are in lower 48. They get kind of more of a torpor rather than a true hibernation. in Alaska, they get a true hibernation because of the extreme temperatures. So bears are in hibernation. There's a possibility a really warm year, some could be waking up, and that would be problematic. But bears are very rarely an issue or even a thought on our mind. Wolves are an apex predator. They have no interest whatsoever in a human in a pack of dogs. So any wolf encounters will be, if you were really lucky, seeing them from a distance and pure curiosity on their part. But rarely are we lucky enough to see that, because wolves are very smart, and they don't have anything to do with humanity or dogs. So wolves really aren't. I'd never be threatened by a wolf or a bear. Moose are what we worry about. Moose are 1,000-pound animals. A lot of the time, 800, 1,200-pound animals on average, a big moose would be, and they're purely fight or flight instinct. 99% of the time, their instinct is flight, but occasionally, especially in heavy snow years like this one, they would rather not run. They like to stay on the trails we use because they're compacted and we can move on them. Moose are primarily preyed upon by wolves when they get stuck in deep snow and they're immobile, tired. So they don't like to get into really deep snow if they can avoid it a lot of the time, especially if wolves are in the area. So they like to stay on our nice hard trails where they can move quickly and themselves. And usually still they get off the way, but occasionally a cow might have a calf, might have a baby with it, or a young bull might kind of trying to sow his oats and really hyper aggressive. And you have these encounters that not go well for dog teams. My team's been attacked by a moose, and most mushers we talk to have had close encounters or a direct attack. So moose are what we worry about. By the time you get to the coast, not many moose on the coast, so you don't have to worry about them there. But through the interior, like through Roan, Nikolai, McGrath, Totna, that whole stretch from the Alaska range that you reach the Yukon River, very moose heavy. We're just hyper cautious where, and typically you can scare them off unless you get a weird scenario where they just kind of charge it. But moose, to answer your question, moose are what we worry about. Then we see a lot. We see a lot of snowshoe hares. We see a lot of foxes. We see coyotes. And you're really lucky not to see wolf.
Right. Well, before we sort of get wrapped up here, is there anything else you want to talk about? Any other stories? Any other crazy sort of things you want to mention, or anyone else you want to introduce here?
Oh, I mean, I'm good if you guys don't have any more specific questions.
I think that's it.
I
think that's it for me.
Enough.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I said I think I rambled enough.
No, you're good. It was interesting. Like, I really enjoyed listening to it. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, guys, this is Riley Dyche. You can visit we're going to have a link to his website, his kennel, in the description of this video. Dark Horse Kennel, right?
Yep, that's it. Dark Horse Racing Kennel.
Dark Horse Racing Kennel. You can meet him. You can meet his team, and you can get to know him a little bit better there. And if ever you're up in Alaska, I'm sure around Iditarod time you can cheer him on.
Awesome. Thanks, Sandy. Appreciate it.
See you soon. If you like the content you saw today, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. It helps us out a ton.
We'll do.
We put out videos every Thursday, and we'll hope to see you all soon. Till then, have a great day. Bye-bye.